Hey, welcome to our inaugural edition of Behind the Label. I'm Lowell, I'm with Elgray Photography.
And I'm Jerry with Stone Fences Tours. I'm glad to have you here with us. We're going to do something a little different than most bourbon podcasts do. So hang with us. This is not going to be something where we're going to tell you this tastes great or what we're tasting out of this, because most of the time I'm not getting what everybody says they're going to taste out of this.
That's true. We're going to get those either.
Yes. So what you're going to see is what we call behind the label. So we're actually going to talk about the history of these two labels right here.
Yeah, and how they're intertwined. It's actually a very interesting story. I think you'll enjoy it. Like you said, we're not focused so much on the taste and the flavor and the aftertaste and everything, but basically enjoying what the history of these labels are and other labels to come.
And like I said, I'm Jerry with Stone Fences Tours. Pretty much I'm a history geek. How big a history geek would you say? I'd say pretty big.
Pretty big.
Yeah, I'm actually a member of, let's say, the Kentucky Civil War Roundtable, a member of the Anderson County Historical Society. I'm a board member of the Battlefield of Richmond Association. I am also a committee member of the Detour Committee for the Bluegrass Trust for Historic Preservation. So when I say history geek, very big history geek. I graduated from West State with a political science degree. Started researching bourbon when we were getting ready to start our company. It was about 6 years ago I really got into bourbon and its history, and have been researching pretty much since then. And our probably most popular tours we do are our Bourbon Baron series, which is pretty much a look inside of certain individuals, families, groups of people that have made such a big impact on the bourbon industry. So pretty much if you think about Colonel Taylor, Pappy Van Winkle, the Beams, the Rippies, the Peppers, the Samuels, who we're talking about today, and even talking about like Prohibition or even women of bourbon. We have a Matriarchs of Bourbon tour also. So that's kind of where we come from. We actually work with the Rippey family in Lawrenceburg. We'll have them probably maybe on the next upcoming episode.
Yeah, that'll be on one of the episodes. Yeah, we'll kind of go through several of the families, kind of the local areas. You'll be I think you'll be surprised at how much unique history there is and how much they're intertwined. So it's in my mind, it's almost like a Game of Thrones type of a situation where there's a lot of mystery, intrigue, backstabbing, climbing the ladder, people selling each other out. So it's good. So it's kind of like Game of Thrones meets Tiger King.
Yeah, I love Tiger King. That's awesome. That's great.
Yeah.
It's pretty similar to that. Yes, and I mean the stories behind these families. I mean, a lot of these families have been around since the late 1700s. I mean, we're talking about the Samuels family today. That's late 1700s that they started. So we hope you enjoy it. Lowell and I, we've known each other forever, since high school. He played guard, I played center. I'm sure you can tell.
Actually, I think we knew each other before then.
We did.
7th and 8th grade.
We played against each other.
We played against each other. Yeah, and then we kind of joined forces like the Wonder Twins in high school. So.
Yeah. We had fun. Big shout out to our coaches, Coach Adams, Coach Patrick, Coach Cecil. Still think of them today. Yep. So, but we just want to give you what's behind this label. We don't want to tell you if it's good. We may make faces if it's bad. But we just want you to realize the people that put it there and their story. So we hope you enjoy it. Like I said, Lowell, a lot of the photos you'll see, especially this one sitting behind us.
This is actually one of the, even though it's not, this bourbon here is actually from Heaven Hill.
Heaven Hill now, yes.
That's in Bardstown. Yeah. This is actually close to Bardstown, but this is, we'll get to that, what this really is, but this is the actual T.W. Samuels distillery, the old Samuels distillery. But as a way of introduction, like he said, my name's Lowell. I'm with Elgray Photography. Again, we have known each other quite a while. So
I'm going to be drinking a little bit more.
Okay. And by the way, we're starting off with the larger bottle, the T.W. Samuels. Jerry provided that. I think, are we going into prices or anything on this?
Well, it's $21. It's a 1 3/4 liter bottle. It's plastic with a screw top, and it even says on the front of it, built-in pour. So it's a 4-year bottled and bond. So you know what bottled and bond means, don't you?
I do, but remind me because I always get it wrong.
Yeah, it was enacted actually in 1897. So the requirements for bottle and bond is it has to be made by one distiller, one distilling season at one distillery.
But it
And-
can be mixed out of different barrels.
Yes, it's not, the requirements are, it has to be at least 4 years old, which this one is at least 4 years old. Has to be 100 proof. And
Why
back,
that part? What in the hell is the 100 proof?
what it was enacted for in 1897, Colonel Taylor was instrumental in it. A lot of people may know Colonel Taylor. There were these bourbon families that were, a lot of them were making what they call rectifying whiskey. So a lot of that started out by, getting barrels from different distilleries and just, mingling that together and calling it your own. Which that still happens today, actually. But also some of the things that some of the places were doing in order to make a whiskey and sell a whiskey at a premium price, they would take White Dog, as we call it, and they would add arsenic, a little pop. They add, tobacco spit,
Yeah,
some
I've heard
color.
that. Yeah, I've heard it.
So they were adding different things to it, and they were calling it bourbon. So that the 1897 that Act, Bottle and Bond Act, pretty much separated itself from pure bourbon versus pretty much a blended whiskey. So that's what that came from. So that's what this is. It's not bad.
It's not bad.
It's not bad.
And on that same line, one of the things that kind of caught my eye, I think I even brought this up to you, is the bourbon industry, in Kentucky has its origins primarily in Scotland and Ireland. And over there, it's actually very common. As a matter of fact, that's sort of the way they do it over there, is they source their whiskey from different sources, from different producers.
Mm-hmm.
So the actual producer is the guy that actually makes the White Dog, and I think he puts it in a barrel, if I'm not mistaken. Some of them, I think, do that. Some of them barrel it themselves. But anyway, over there, that's sort of the system there, is to basically select different pieces and parts from other producers, put it in the barrel to make your own distinctive taste. Here, it's not quite, or it hasn't been. I'll say it hasn't been that way, but I've noticed, like I was reading some of those articles, apparently that's kind of becoming less of a thing and more accepted to get your product, your initial product, from somewhere else, and then essentially do the aging and finishing, which is a whole other process. The finishing thing now is
It's called sourcing.
Yeah.
A lot of, if you go, there's so many distilleries down. If you go to a little craft distillery that's been around for 2 years and it's offering a 10-year-old bourbon, it's been sourced. Different places, MGP has a large distillery up in Orangeburg, Indiana. Just different places source it. And there's nothing wrong with that. If it's a good bourbon, it's a good bourbon.
That's kind of what I look at it. Because to me, bourbon is much more about, if your goal is basically just to get drunk, don't use bourbon. Use vodka or something else, or anything else. Bourbon is designed specifically to have a certain culture around it, a certain experience, a certain ambiance that kind of comes along with the bourbon that includes things like the history, the family histories, stone fences, the woods, the fields, everything that's kind of symbolizes Kentucky. I think last I read, 85 to 90% is still made in Kentucky, so it's still
95.
Yeah, so it's still very much a Kentucky thing. I know some California occasionally see those labels. Occasionally, I think I saw one from Missouri. But when people around the world think of bourbon, they think of Kentucky. I know I was in Scotland, I guess last year, Iceland before that. You go to any place and you point to a bottle on the shelf and you say, "Hey, you see that bottle?" I'm like, "Yeah, Kentucky." Mm-hmm. They know Kentucky. They know Kentucky Fried Chicken and they know Kentucky bourbon.
Well, the Bourbon Trail this last year had, as you see, I got my Bourbon Trail shirt on, which this is from 2015. So this is when we were researching. Did a lot of research because we did the Bourbon Trail twice. This year, I think there were just 9 on the Bourbon Trail. There's 18 now. So there's a lot of places, a lot of good places to go see. So it's 1.7 million visitors last year. Just for the Bourbon Trail. And that's only 20-some distilleries. You're talking about there's 70-some in the state now. Big tourism here. So that's the reason we love it.
Pike County, are they on it yet? They are.
They're actually, they're pretty much, you can go to either town branch or that and get the same stand. So you're completing one of the stamps by going to either one of those.
Yeah, but what I was going to say is their Kentucky tourism is actually using that as a way to get people out of central Kentucky, even into eastern Kentucky.
Eastern Kentucky, OZ Tyler's out in Owensboro.
Yeah,
so that's a
so
long
it's really
drive
starting
out
to
there.
stretch it out.
It
It's
is.
bringing a lot of business, a lot of dollars, a lot of economic boom to Kentucky, and certainly we'll need that once all this pandemic thing is over. We'll take a little side branch and kind of introduce myself a little bit more and tell where I kind of came from. Again, we're both from Eastern Kentucky, so we kind of have a backstory in our heritage of basically the moonshine makers, which then also tie into modern day bourbon. I'm sure we'll get into that at some point. But I've always
moonshine led to NASCAR too.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Moonshine did a lot of stuff.
It did, yes.
Make the Kennedys who they are.
Yes.
Yeah, there'd be no JFK without moonshine. So I'm sure we'll get into all that. I've always been a bit of a science nerd, semi-history geek, not nearly to the level of Jerry. Most of my background is more science, medical related. Went to Moorhead in UK, got science degrees and got an advanced doctoral degree at UK. Kind of got out of that and have since transitioned into photography, sort of in spits and sputters. Actually was originally the high school yearbook photographer. I had no idea what I was doing with the camera, literally just pointing and shooting. But have kind of refined that a little bit. Now I do sort of about a mix. I'm primarily a portrait photographer, but also really enjoy going out, for instance, like this, doing landscapes, doing architecture, historical sites. This is, again, the old Samuel's Distillery in north of Bardstown. We'll get to that, and we'll hopefully incorporate some other shots that we took when actually you were on the tour as well, man. From that day, hopefully we'll incorporate those in this video, so you can kind of see a little bit of a little bit better look at that. I think they did have plans at least to make that into sort of a destination, a bourbon destination, which I think is a great idea. And it's kind of a different thing. It's not now like, if you go to a distillery, you're sort of there to see the distillery. They're making it kind of where you go see the distillery, but you also have a restaurant, you have cottages, and you have a venue.
You stay there.
Yeah, it's kind of you stay there. So it's gonna be kind of like a bourbon resort, I guess.
Yeah, they were great. So yeah, we'll talk about meeting them and everything, and we're looking forward. We're gonna actually have our Samuel's tour come out there and do probably a restoration tour so before it ever starts producing.
I think that would be great. Yeah.
Producing bourbon, so it's pretty cool. But today, one other thing we want to kind of put out there is we both have dealings with the Rippies in Lawrenceburg.
Yes, great people.
Yes, and we do what we call the bourbon sessions. We work with the family. The Rippies, if you don't know, the Rippie Brothers Distillery became Wild Turkey. So we both kind of work with them, and it's all about making money for that house to rehab that house. It's actually owned by two great-grandsons of T.B. Rippie that bought it at foreclosure. And we have what we call bourbon sessions once a month, and we have a speaker with tastings. And we've had people like, Fred Minnick, Chad and Sarah from It's Bourbon Night, Freddie Johnson from Buffalo Trace.
Freddie was great.
He was great. He was awesome. And we've had
Nick,
people.
Nick was.
We've had Nick. Yeah, Nick Quinte. We'll talk about him too when we talk about going there. The bourbon
He
archaeologist.
did a great job. Yeah.
You talk about a bourbon history geek. He is too. And so he was there. He was actually the initial one. We started this last April. All the money goes to the house and goes to the refurbishing of the house. And it's a beautiful house.
Yep.
And Main Street in Lawrenceburg, 11,000 square feet.
Yeah.
Just a gorgeous
Beautiful.
house.
In fact, it's one of our basically location shots that we offer through All Great Photography. Done several of them down there. Hopefully you guys have seen it. If you haven't, check it out. It's just beautiful. It looks like a rehabbed haunted mansion in a way. Without the well, I don't know. It actually is supposed to be haunted, I think.
Supposedly. It depends on which great-grandson you ask.
There you go.
Yeah. One says it is, one says it isn't.
But it is just beautiful. Lots of mahogany, lots of dark oak, 12, 15-foot ceilings. So if you're looking at something like engagement photos, weddings, events. We just shot an event. The Civil Air Patrol had their ball there. It was just beautiful place. Couldn't find any better people to work with. Big shout out to Millie.
Yes,
we should
Millie
give her some credit.
Millie keeps Mr. Rippie, Mr. Reagan. She keeps them in line. But we also do tours there. We do our Rippie's tour. That's actually first stop, and we actually have a tasting of Lawrenceburg products that you won't get at Wild Turkey or Four Roses. So it's something a little different there. They have their liquor license now. So
Oh, that's right. Yep. They do.
yeah. So we they've been great. So we go there on that tour, and like I said, the Bourbon Sessions is a monthly event. You can check on TV Rippy events to see what's coming up. Hopefully here soon. We had Michael Veach actually scheduled for this last month, and we've had to
It'll work out.
postpone that. So it's actually, we've got it scheduled for late May, and we'll see. We might have to postpone that again. But
Now you were talking about the history of the Rippies. Are they tied in with probably the most famous bourbon everyone in the world knows is Pappy Van Winkle? Are they tied into that? I've always wondered.
not really. Pappy, we'll talk about him. I don't know if I can afford to buy a bottle of him. We'll talk about him some. But no,
we can print one off the internet and stick it on a different bottle and pretend we're drinking that.
Yeah, that might be. What we're gonna do is when we drink, have this bourbon for our talks, it's going to be affordable bourbon. We don't want something that's $200. Like I said, this is $21 with a screw top, and it pretty much covers. It's not the recipe that the Samuels family used. It's their original bourbon was a 4-year 90 proof bourbon, and this is a bottle and bond. So
now the bottle and bond though, you said had to be 100 proof.
100 proof
in order to do it.
Mm-hmm.
So anything lower than that, which brings up a point that I know you're actually the one that taught me that is the whiskey you see on the shelves. Like if you go to wherever your favorite liquor store and you see something that's 80 proof, that actually came out of the barrel at 160. I don't know.
They can distill it no more than higher than 160. They can put it in a barrel no higher than 125.
Okay.
So they've had to water it down from that point.
Right. So it's watered down from that point.
Yeah. It sure is, because most of the time, whiskey as it ages in the barrel, it actually water evaporates, so the proof gets a little higher from what they put in.
Oh, that's odd, because I would have thought that would have been different. I would have thought the alcohol would have, because you always hear the angel share.
Yeah.
Of the alcohol.
It's actually the water molecules are smaller than the bourbon, the alcohol molecules, so it actually evaporates first, and usually the proof goes up. So, but like I said, we're history. We're talking about history, and we're talking about the Samuels family. So you're looking here at the T.W. Samuels bottle. Like I said, it's made by Heaven Hill. They don't give out their mash bill. You know what the mash bill is? Mm-hmm. Yeah. So
I know what a mash bill is.
Yes. This one is considered a rye bourbon. It's like I said, it's 100 proof, at least 4 years old. So this is kind of your bottom shelf bourbon. So, but it's T.W. Samuels. So if we talk about the Samuels family, we kind of break it up. There were the early Samuels family that were, as you were talking about, the Scots and the Irish. They were Scottish Irish.
Right.
When they came here. And Robert Samuels Jr. actually kind of started the line. So he was actually fought in the Revolutionary War. And
now, when did he come over from? Do you know that? When did he?
I don't know the exact date when he came over. I know his father was here already, so he was at least second generation.
So he was actually born in the States.
He was born in, I believe it was Pennsylvania, and moved here. He actually got a 60-acre corn writ after the Revolutionary War. Yeah, which a lot of people got.
So he was here. I mean, that's 1776. So that's well before this. So you're looking at the very early years of this country, and that's kind of what I like about bourbon is that it literally starts with the history of the whole country.
It does, yeah. And he was.
Well, you'll get to the George Washington tie-in here.
He was. He must have been pretty good what he did.
He must have been.
I don't know if he made contacts with George Washington during the Revolutionary War, but he actually became George Washington's master distiller. Yeah. At his distillery.
And from what I read, George Washington himself actually was a pretty good moonshiner. Basically,
they still have a distillery on site, at Mount Vernon now.
Yeah. So apparently, he himself personally made basically moonshine, and then I don't know, did he actually age it then in barrels, or was it just white whiskey at that point?
Well, a lot of it was white whiskey. I mean, early on, they never really thought about aging. The aging process kind of came. A lot of people, the charred barrels. Yeah. There's a lot of different. You've got the Elijah Craig story where his farm, his barn burnt and charred the barrels. Oh, I hadn't heard. Magically.
I hadn't heard this.
Yeah, he supposedly is the father of bourbon, and it magically burnt just the inside, not the outside. So no, a lot of people think the French, because they were already doing brandy in charred barrels.
That's where I would put my money is because I know they even now, like in Scotland, they finish a lot of their whiskey in like brandy cask, and even in wine cask that are charred now. So there was already a set history, and there's the tie-in with the bourbon with Louisiana, Bourbon Street, all that stuff. So that's where I would put my money.
Well, brandy was big here. I mean, there were a lot of brandy distilleries early on during this time. They were making a
because
brandy.
of the grapes here.
Yeah. We'll talk about grapes sometime. Yeah, that's another subject. Yeah, here in Kentucky, we know how to produce our liquor. So Robert Samuels, like I said, he got the corn writ. So him and his son William actually, got their land and actually started a farm distillery on that land. So farm distilleries,
Now, where was this farm?
It's actually in Deatsville, outside of Deatsville, which is just right outside of Bardstown.
Now, is that the same property as this?
Well, close in location. It's not, more than likely not the same exact location, but close in location to that side.
All right.
And so they actually, it was farm distilling. So a lot of people, early on, a lot of these farm distillers, they actually opened up around springs and all that stuff. They were more concerned about the water source, easy water source to make their, mostly it was white, white lightning or, all that, early on it wasn't really aged. So they were, a lot of them set up like Elijah Craig set up by a spring. A lot of them set up by springs, especially in their, late 1700s.
From what I've read, several of the early distillers were actually, like you said, farmers that were actually had a grain mill, had a water wheel that ran corn grain, ground corn and wheat or barley or whatever anybody grew. Mostly, I think, corn.
Here it grew easy, so they had these land grants. So they had such big land grants. I mean, the corn, you can only use so much of it for meal.
Right, and they said they would grind it up, and then because they were afraid it was going to go bad, then they would turn it into whiskey.
Yeah, you don't have to worry about going bad.
You don't have to go bad. And then they would then have a product that it was actually worth more than what the corn that would have went bad. Then they sold it back to the people that basically owed the money in the first place.
Yeah, it was barter. It was used to barter with. I mean, there was not a lot of, money in in Kentucky at that time. We're across from the Appalachians.
Right.
Not a lot of money, so it was used a lot to barter with and trade with. So these early farm distilleries that Robert and his son William started, that was used a lot to buy the necessities of what they needed. So that was actually the first two generations of the Samuels family. A lot of people think it started with T.W. Samuels, but actually there were two generations before that. A lot of people.
But that wasn't an actual, like what you consider a commercial distilling operation. No. They basically just made it for
themselves,
family, neighbors, and barter trade.
Yes.
Is there any record of how much they actually, how much they produced? Or I guess
I haven't seen that. I'm sure there probably is. I mean, it depends on if they weren't paying taxes on it.
I was going to say
if they weren't paying taxes on it.
Probably a reason
it's hard.
Maybe we made 5 gallons last year.
Yeah, that's where the trouble comes in. Telling who was the first. Louisville claims it was Evan Williams. Georgetown claims it was Elijah Craig. Paris and Bourbon County claims it, was Jacob Spears. It's really hard to say because they weren't taxed right off the bat.
Now, was the name of Bourbon County, I've always wondered this, was it given to the county before there was such a thing as bourbon whiskey?
Yes, it was actually, we love the French. So it was named after the French family.
Okay, because I've read something about the Bourbon family, or however you say the French.
Which it was a lot larger than at the time, when Kentucky was originally, as a state, there were only, 3 counties, and then it kind of spread out from there. Because Bourbon County went all the way to Maysville. So, its port was in Maysville. And, they would send that up to Maysville, and they would ship it down to Ohio, down to Mississippi, to New Orleans.
I was going to say, that makes actually then good sense, because if you have essentially a county that's sympathetic and proud of their French connections, and they have a port on Ohio that goes all the way to New Orleans,
which was owned by the French, yes. Yes, and there's a big to do.
So
about,
you're saying bourbon is actually not Scottish Irish, but French?
Well, most of the people came here were Scottish Irish, some German, and actually some Jewish influence early on.
I didn't know that.
Yes, so not as much. Not as much French.
I didn't know that.
They were big into their brandy, so maybe the brandy.
Yeah, cognac and brandy, I think, is their big thing.
So that's kind of the first 2 generations, which is kind of funny. We'll talk about it later when we talk about Maker's Mark and.
Now, do you have? I know we're going to try to add some things into this video. Do you have any? I know there wouldn't be photos, but do you have any paintings or anything that show Robert?
Do not have anything of Robert. Have not seen anything of Robert. We have, or his son William. They both died about the same time. Early 1820s. And actually, third generation T.W. Samuels, who we'll talk a lot about, actually didn't open his distillery until the 1840s. So there was a gap there, but it was on the same kind of land, the same land here. So
what was he doing, T.W.? What was he doing during that 20-year gap? Was he out in a war or something?
Well, yeah, he was born actually toward the end of when his father passed away. He was born, it was only like a year or two difference from when his father passed away, and he was born. So he was actually different things. He was actually the high sheriff of Bardstown.
I read that, yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, that's right, because of the Jesse. There's all kinds of titles,
He was the high sheriff. So in the 1860s, he was high sheriff from Bardstown, and it's toward the end of the Civil War. And Quantrill, he was a raider, Confederate raider. Just as even actually after Lee surrendered, he was coming in central Kentucky raiding, and toward the end of the Civil War, T.W., who we'll talk about, actually arrested members of the Quantrill Raiders. One of those happened to be Frank James.
And they're all in Cadillacs.
No Cadillacs then. But yeah, Frank James from the James brothers.
Yes.
So he actually arrested him, and the funny thing is they were cousins.
I was going to say, he was related.
His uncle married Zerelda James, and so they kind of knew about each other, and it was his cousin he arrested. So he was cousins to the James brothers, Frank and Jesse.
So far we're literally less than 100 years. We've already tied in the beginnings of Kentucky history, the French, the beginning of economic development in the country, the James gang. We're already well on our way in this Game of Thrones. So.
Yeah. T.W. We'll post a picture of him. It's a very unusual picture.
I was kind of wondering if that was sort of more of a cartoon.
That looks more like a caricature.
It was maybe a political caricature.
It's a huge hat. When you see the photo, huge hat, very pointy beard. But he was the member of the family that actually started commercial distilling. It was 1844 when he built, this distillery there in Deatsville. It didn't look like this. This is later.
That's actually what was going to be my next question. Is like when they started those really early distilleries, I know I've seen pictures of ruins. I think you've shown me some pictures of ruins and stuff. I mean, you're talking about a pretty rudimentary thing of basically stone block wall, maybe mud brick, and wood. I mean, these weren't like super sophisticated buildings.
As the 1800s went along, as you get toward the second half, you're talking about brick and all that. Nicer limestone buildings, a little bit nicer buildings. But
so the first ones are even rougher than that.
Yes.
So you're looking at basically making moonshine in a barn type deal.
Yeah. T.W. In 1844 he built the commercial distillery. He ran it with his son William I. And like I said, they ran that for a long time till the late 1800s.
Now, where did he get his money to start the distillery, or was he already in the farming? Like, there has to be a backstory to that.
Well, that's the thing. I mean,
how does he get started on that?
His dad, his grandfather were in distilling, so that land. I mean, if you think about Kentucky at that time, land was the big thing. Land was money. If you owned land, you had money.
Right.
So I mean, it's just pretty much the care over having that land, and that's what everybody fought for. They didn't fight for money; they fought for land back in the day. So, they had a lot of land. T.W. was prominent in the, in Bardstown area. Like I said, he was house sheriff.
From what I read, he apparently had a little bit of political sway as well. Because he was house sheriff, but it sounded like he also had a lot of the kind of influential connections where he had influence over people. That always ends up business connections. Oh yeah, I want your whiskey. Give me 20 barrels of that.
Yeah, that's right.
Now, over again.
So a lot of people know that if they know bourbon in Kentucky, they know that we sit on a limestone shelf. It's great for bourbon because it filters all the impurities, iron, all that out of the water. That would be bad for bourbon. So it's great for bourbon, and actually it's great for why it's great for racehorses.
Higher calcium makes stronger bones.
It does. Faster horses. That's true.
There you go.
It's calcium fortified water. So
yeah, it's calcium carbonate.
Yeah. So our two biggest industries in the state are because of where we sit.
Yeah.
I guess
which brings up a point, and you're probably the right guy to ask this. So one of the reasons I got kind of interested in, especially the history and the kind of the mystique of especially bourbon, is through genealogy research of my own family, coming from Scotland to Ireland, and you know, there's a whole back. I love all that stuff of figuring out kind of where we came from and how we ended up in Eastern Kentucky, especially because if you look at, for instance, if you do like a DNA test like I did, and they send back that little map that shows like where you're from, there's 2 circles basically. There's Eastern Kentucky, and then there's Scotland, Ireland, England. And that was it.
That's my ancestors too. Is
Yeah, so
Scotland, Ireland, England, but I had some French.
I had a little bit of I had a small.
Yeah, my mom's
which
side
actually
was
still ties into
yeah,
some of this.
We're called the master, so we had a lot of French.
But that's what got me kind of interested in this. But a question that's always lingered is you have all these basically Irish and Scotch Irish coming over. They are adept at making moonshine. They can make it out of probably a tin can. They can make moonshine out of anything. Why did the distilleries? Why did the bourbon industry, the whiskey industry, not start in Eastern Kentucky as opposed to here? And I realize it probably is because of the water, but we also have, you know, especially that time before all the coal mining and everything basically polluted the streams. I would have to imagine the streams in Eastern Kentucky were pretty clean. You know, there's a more science and geology here. There's a cap of sandstone that covers most of the limestone that's in Eastern Kentucky. So you don't have the same percolating effect. You have a lot of the water actually kind of runs off the top and doesn't ever have a chance to get into the limestone. But I can't imagine that the early guys that were originally doing this had any inkling that there was something special about the ground or rocks or geology or anything. They just knew, hey, this tastes good. And
well, they're bringing this. I mean, a lot of these people come from Maryland, Pennsylvania, where they're making rye. And when they came here, corn was what grew well here. So they changed their products from what they used to be making rye whiskey.
Maybe that's another thing is that, especially in the central part of Kentucky, you just have so much more flat land that is tillable, and you can raise a lot more corn. You know, again, where we're from, McGoffin County, I've never looked it up, but there's probably not, I would say, 30 square miles of flat land in the whole county.
I lived in a holler.
Yeah.
I grew up in a holler.
I grew up in a holler as well, and it literally, this is no joke, you can throw a rock from one side of the hill to the other. That's how narrow these little places are.
It's funny, in Eastern Kentucky, it's actually, there were more brandy distilleries than there were bourbon distilleries. If you look,
I didn't know there was any distilleries.
There was this great book put out by Chet Zoller, does a lot of bourbon history books, and actually talks about all the distilleries in Kentucky. And it'll show you locations and all that stuff. It's a great book.
Well, I'd like to get that.
And it actually talks about, it lists some of the brandy distilleries. And if you look in the Eastern Kentucky, there was a lot of brandy compared to bourbon. So
now, were they actually making wine first and then brandy?
Yeah, because wine grows better on more of a sloped area.
Yeah, like a
because it doesn't like a lot of water, so it likes something that drains well. So wine actually grows better on more of a terrain that's more sloped, which is what it is. If you've never been to Kentucky, and we're like, I don't know, 4 different states in one. Northern Kentucky, I lived in Northern Kentucky for a long time.
That's not really in Kentucky.
My wife says it's Cincinnati.
Yeah, exactly. It's South Cincinnati.
Yeah, and I grew up in Eastern Kentucky, which is all hills, mountains and hills. So very, no level ground. And then now I live in, Central Kentucky in the bluegrass area, and it's just rolling. It's beautiful. It's beautiful here. There's a lot of reasons to come here. Bourbon is a big one. Yeah. Horses are another big one. But there's a lot of
if you're watching this and you're outside Kentucky, the bourbon is just that's kind of part of the draw to it because it encapsulates all of that. It encapsulates history, outdoor life, rivers, streams. We have cliffs, we have caves, we have all this stuff, and all of that has tie-ins. There's some way you can tie that in with all the bourbon production. That's what I kind of, even when you're drinking it, you're thinking, oh, this, you get reminiscence of like, oh, it smells like an oak tree. It smells like that time I walked down that trail and I remember smelling that.
Well, I think I smell the corn, and all I think about is
I'm getting some corn.
I'm just thinking in October,
Ooh, it does.
laying along, in some bottom or up on a hillside, and what we did, corn and cars.
That's what it smells like.
Corn and cars. We'd raid a cornfield. We get us a bucket of corn, and we'd sit, up on a hillside or in a bottom, and when a car passed, we would throw corn at it. We weren't, Eastern Kentucky, that was about all we had to do.
Yeah, and this isn't like soft cream corn or something.
No,
this is
hard corn.
This is much more akin to lightweight gravel.
This is grain that they feed, feed horses and pigs and cattle. It was hard corn, and we had a lot of people stop on us.
Yeah.
But it was fun.
But but again, bourbon reminds me of things like that. It even reminds me, again, when I was a young, very young, probably 7, 8 years old, my granddad used to make moonshine. Very rough little still, small little still, and I was the wood boy.
Kept the fire going.
My only job was to bring wood and keep the fire going. And then he would put it in just this menagerie of different jugs. It wasn't like a really classy operation. Some of it was probably even milk jugs or something. And then he would make some appointment somewhere, and we would go to Mount Sterling, and some guy came, I assume probably from Cincinnati or something. He always had a northern accent. They would talk while I wasn't listening, kind of over on the side, and then he'd be like, "Okay, put all that stuff." And so then my next job would be take the jugs, put them in the other guy's car.
So he made you do all the work.
Basically. Yeah. But then I would get, I don't know, $3, $4, and I thought I was getting paid big money to do that. So
that's why I was in the tobacco fields. It was like $3 an hour.
It's sort of the same kind of
back-breaking work for $3 an hour for a month.
But even that, like tobacco, on some bourbons you get a real good tobacco smell.
A lot of people
and
smell
that reminds me of that growing up, smelling tobacco and the barns. Occasionally, me and Eric Patrick, we used to have to work a little bit in the barns. You could get it all over your hands. And
I loved it. My grandparents grew it. They had a big old farm. They grew it. And I'd sit on the back of the tractor when I was like 8 or 9 years old and just pop the plant in. Yeah. And it did all that. But, when I got older, my uncle had it, and I would be in the barns hanging and lifting them up.
I never did like I'm not much on
stripping tobacco. So
I was much more on the.
This is a 6'6" guy. It's not much on height.
Not much on the climbing up in the barn thing.
I'd be spraddled out across 2 boards. The person below me lifted up and we put it on. So put it on up.
But that's sort of an aside of why this is kind of why both of us kind of enjoy this, because it reminisces back to history, culture, again, intrigue. There's all kinds of. It's like reading a novel, drinking a whiskey.
Yes, it is. It is. A lot of people don't. They don't think about it. They see it and like, well, it's T.W. Samuels, but
Right. And
we're telling you T.W. Samuels, who he was, who the family was. A lot of people know the Samuels name, and they know this bottle right here, which we'll talk about in our next episode. But that took a lot of generations to get there.
Right.
And a lot of stories and a lot of, like I said, intrigue, and just, it's Kentucky. So like I said, we talked about T.W. Samuels, and he started this distillery, and he passed away. Him and his son both actually passed away, the same year in 1898.
Now, was his son, was he kind of famous for bourbon too, or he was sort of in his father's shadow?
He was in his shadow of his father. Yeah, William Isaac Samuels. He worked in the distillery, but his dad started it, so he was in his father's shadow. And
so he wasn't like some of the other guys that kind of struck out on their own, started their own distillery. He basically worked alongside, died alongside.
Yes, same year.
And he's sort of an asterisk in the T.W. Samuels.
It is, because it kind of fell when they both passed away that year. It fell to Leslie, which was William Isaac's son. So he kind of took control of it then. It's 1898, and he took control of it, and he maintained it. It was eventually purchased by the Star Distillery in Cincinnati, but he still owned part of the ownership of it. It was purchased before Prohibition.
And this was still on the same farm, the same property.
It actually burnt down. Before Prohibition, and they rebuilt it. And then, like I said, this company come in and purchased controlling interest of the distillery. So Leslie still had interest in the distillery, still worked at the distillery, still was a manager at the distillery, but it was actually owned by this company, Star Distillery. And that ran.
Now, is Star, that company, is it still in operation, or did it get divided out? Or
no,
so it kind of fell away. Okay.
Yes, and it ran through Prohibition. So during Prohibition, even though they had rebuilt the distillery during Prohibition, it's 13 years. So at that time, they took the distillery apart and used it for salvage. So that distillery that they built after the fire was torn apart.
Oh, wow.
And used for salvage during
Here's a
Prohibition.
question for you.
Yeah.
Do you know how many distilleries basically went out of business, or how many distilleries were there in Kentucky right before Prohibition, and then how many went out of business because of Prohibition?
There were a lot. There was as many as, before Prohibition at one time, there's as many as 2,000 at one point or another.
2,000
Yes,
distilleries
yes.
in Kentucky?
In Kentucky. Yes. Before. At one time or another. Not right when you lead up to Prohibition,
Yeah.
but at one time or another, there's at least almost 2,000 of them. After 6. When Prohibition ended, there were 6.
Yeah, and the reason they were still in business is because they either had a federal
Medicinal
license
whiskey.
to do medicinal whiskey,
Yes. Yeah.
Or then some of them switched to kind of like they're doing now with the hand sanitizer. Did they ever do anything like that, like alcohol for fuel? Or
Well,
alcohol
they did that kind of in World War II. A lot of
Maybe
them
that's-
were
maybe
forced.
that's what- maybe that's
Yeah, a
what
lot
I'm
of them were
thinking,
forced to produce.
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking of. Ethanol production
Yes.
for fuel.
They were. But during Prohibition, they made medicinal whiskey, which was a 4-year bottle and bond.
Even the medicinal. was
Medicinal
40.
whiskey had to be a 4-year bottle, at least a 4-year
So
bottle.
it had
and
to
bond.
actually be a decent whiskey even for medicinal.
Well, it had to be 100 proof. There's a lot of 100 proof that's not great. So, but yeah, it had to be a bottle, 4-year, at least a 4-year 100 proof. You got it refills 3 times.
Well, I was going to ask you,
refills.
do you know like how much was a typical prescription? Like,
I think it
did
was
you
a
get
pint at the time. It was a pint, and you could refill that 3 times.
per
So
month or per?
yes.
So you got 3 pints a month.
Yes.
Of
And
100
then if you had
proof
a lot
whiskey.
of family members, you got more than that.
Okay.
Yeah. Anybody could get it.
So at that time, you really wanted to claim all of your kin.
Everybody was sick.
Everybody was sick, and everybody was your kin.
Yes. Yes.
You had 27 relatives, and they were all sick.
Yeah. So these distilleries were still, they had actually shut down production during Prohibition for a while, and then they were getting low on resources. So a lot of the distilleries that had already produced it, all this stuff was combined into local warehouses that were then under lock and key.
Now, who held the key? Something like that. Like,
Well,
who was the overseeing?
You talking about government? You're talking about government workers and stuff like that. That they oversaw these distilleries, so nobody had a little, nobody. There were a lot of robberies at the.
That's what I was going to say.
Yeah, there were a lot of them that were
I would have
robbed
to
at the
think
time.
there was a lot of stuff going out the back door.
There was.
Illegally,
Mm-hmm.
as much as there was out the front door for a prescription.
If you want to look at a warehouse, if you want to know if it was produced before Prohibition, see if there's bars on the windows on the lower two levels.
Also, if there's bars, it's before Prohibition.
Yes. Yeah. Actually,
sense.
actually, during Prohibition, that kind of stuff, it was put on. They were there beforehand, but it was put on during Prohibition to keep them from rolling barrels.
I just
out
wonder
the-
again, like kind of with the intrigue of the whole industry, there has to be a million good stories of, let's say you're a warehouse manager of a medicinal distillery.
Mhm.
This is when was Prohibition? What years?
1920 to 1933.
So you're talking about it encompasses the Depression as well.
Mm-hmm. Started, yeah.
So you're talking about some really poor people, and if you're a guy that's say a manager of a whiskey distillery warehouse, your key would be worth a lot of money. Where you're like, I just happened to leave that back door open for 2.5 hours.
That's right. Yeah,
That would be a good side gig.
yeah, and then Prohibition started the mob and all that stuff. So
Right. And the Kennedys.
and, we'll get to that during our Prohibition one. But back to the Samuels. Like I said, they ran it through 1898, and then Leslie Samuels. We'll have a picture of the lineage here from
Yeah, that's what we're
T.W.
looking at here.
T.W. Samuels. If you notice the names of the Samuels family, you see a lot of William and a lot of Roberts.
Yeah, and
A lot of Williams, a lot of Roberts.
that's like when you sent me this kind of, Jerry sent me this kind of preview. I tend to get lost in all. I'm like, oh gosh, I can't remember who's who. These people all sound
a
the
lot
same.
of Williams, a lot
Yeah,
of
they all
Roberts.
sound the same.
Yeah, so you got T.W. Williams, his son William Isaac, or T.W. Samuels, his son William Isaac Samuels. But at this time, once you get the early 1900s Prohibition, you got Leslie Samuels that took over. After Prohibition, the distillery was rebuilt.
Now, was the whiskey right before Prohibition, was it sold as T.W. Samuel's whiskey? What was the name? What was the
They
brand?
had different brands. They had T.W. Samuel's, they had Old Jordan, and there was one other. Hold on one second here. I can actually tell you. I've got it over here in my little cheat sheet some. There was actually Old Deatsville, which is actually where the distillery was located.
Okay. All right,
Yeah,
that makes
Old
sense.
Deatsville. So they own, they had 3 different brands that they had at one time.
Now, were these brands different qualities, or they were?
Yeah, like I said, the Samuels are, the Old Samuels, T.W. Samuels was a 4-year 90 proof. It's kind of, as we get talking about Leslie Samuels and his son T.W. Samuels IV, or as a lot of people know, Bill Samuels Sr., was working at the distillery. Bill Samuels Sr., when he was there, tried to get his dad to change the recipe because he did not like the taste of the bourbon. It's a rye-based bourbon.
I remember reading that, yeah.
So he tried to get his dad to change it. He did not like it. He thought it was not the greatest bourbon ever was. And he tried for a long time to get him to change it. So, I mean, you're talking about, eventually Leslie, he dies right after Prohibition ends and the distillery is rebuilt.
So that's a quick turnover then. So you had T.W.,
William.
his son William.
They were about the same time.
And then Leslie, all basically spanning essentially Prohibition.
Well, pretty much from the TW built in 1844, so you're talking about 1844 date.
Okay, so it's a little farther back.
Yes, so 1933, he died in 1936, Leslie did. And his son William, is T.W. Samuels, or Bill Samuels Sr., was like the plant manager of the distillery after that.
And this was still in Deatsville.
Still in Deatsville. Like I said, it was rebuilt after Prohibition, which is actually some of the pictures you got here. This picture here was after Prohibition when it was rebuilt.
So okay,
Yeah.
all right.
Yeah, so this is, you're talking about, it was rebuilt right after Prohibition.
So these structures are, Leslie is responsible for these structures?
Yes,
Okay.
he was around at that time. Yeah, him and his son, like I said, Bill Samuels Sr., who we'll talk about in our next episode. But it lasted, this distillery here lasted until 1952. There's some things that happened between when Leslie died in 1952. The name was changed from T.W. Samuels Distillery, which it was named after Prohibition, and the name was changed to Country Distillers Products Incorporated in 1942. And like I said, Bill Samuels Sr., he owned part of the distillery, but he didn't own controlling interest of the distillery. So those that did wanted to sell the distillery, and he never had enough.
Now, who are those controlling interests?
Well, it was out of Cincinnati.
Oh, this is the Star Distillery.
There's people out of Cincinnati that owned. Yeah, it kind of passed hands, and they owned controlling interest. They wanted to sell it, so they sold it in 1943. And Bill Samuels Sr. never had enough money to actually purchase it, so he's bought out.
And this, for me, this is kind of where the story. Before this, it's more of a history lesson to me.
Yeah.
And has a lot of nostalgia because it kind of invokes the pioneer Kentucky image. The farmer that's kind of out there in the field with his corn, the whole thing. But now this is where all the Game
This is where
of
the courts
Thrones-
get involved.
This is where the Game of Thrones start. One more question on this. I know when we did our tour, there was one building. Actually, I think it's this. I call it the powerhouse building.
Yeah. That was awesome.
Was that ever used to produce electricity outside the plant?
Not that I know of.
For what we're talking about, there is a building on the old Samuels property that clearly was a power station.
Yeah, I think the steel was in the taller one.
Yeah, that must make sense that the steel would be there.
But it was yes. I think it was just for the distillery you're talking about. This was a large plant.
Yeah, it's a huge industrial complex of the time.
Yeah.
I mean, with its own power generation, which I really like the machinery, and I just think it's if you're a fan of steampunk, it's like a steampunk.
It's great. It's great. It's great. I mean, so Bill's out. He's out of the distillery, but what he does is he incorporates the names
So now,
T.W. Samuels.
So just for the timeline, so Bill, we're talking already about, go through the generations again, because that's
Yeah,
kind of
so we've got Robert and
Robert.
his son William. That's the early pioneers.
Okay, so Robert and William, so
Yeah.
we already have 2 generations.
Yeah, and then you have T.W. and his son William I, which died the same year.
Right.
And then it
And
passed
then
to Leslie. So you're talking about 5 generations.
So you're already 5 generations into this
Yeah.
barren family that's
Yeah.
building this bourbon empire.
And Bill is at the end of the T.W. Samuels lifeline, as we say.
And then Bill kind of loses it all. So this is
He
kind
does,
of
he
rags
loses
to
it all.
riches kind of a thing. So we have everything. We have rags to riches. We have intrigue.
Yeah.
We have court battles. We got
Yeah, because he incorporates the names, T.W. Samuels incorporates a couple names, which
Now he incorporates it into what? Does he start his own distillery?
he just starts using the names. He starts using those names.
But is he producing his own whiskey
Not yet.
outside
Not
the
yet.
start?
No, he just incorporated those names for his own use.
But he didn't have the right because he
He did not have the right,
He didn't have
yeah.
controlling interest in his own family's
No,
distillery.
Country Distillers.
Aha.
Like I said, the name was changed to Country Distillers in '42. So they sold the plant in '43. So they sued him. The new owners of the Country Distillers sued him for the naming rights, because like I said, everything is names. Everything is names. I mean, it's all about the name.
But now they hadn't used this Star Distiller Country Distillery, had not capitalized on this Samuel's name up to this point.
Well,
right?
they actually, and like I said, after Prohibition, it was actually, the name was actually the T.W. Samuels Distillery. It was incorporated as the T.W. Samuels Distillery.
But that was the business name, not basically the brand name.
Yes.
Is what I'm thinking. So
Yes,
the
that's the
brand
brand
name was
name,
actually
yeah.
Country.
Country Distillers, actually, T.W. Samuels is more the brand name, and Country Distillers is more the...
Okay, so they actually
Yeah.
did use the Samuel's name as part of their brand. The
Yes.
part that the consumer sees on the shelf.
Yes,
Okay, all right.
is the Samuel's name. And
Okay.
so they sued Bill and won. So he lost the right to use the name of it. Now the distillery itself actually closed in 1952. It was used for many things after that. Like I said, it was used to make bottled water. We saw that.
We saw that.
And we saw the
also
line and
saw
everything.
the line of isopropyl, or I guess it was isopropyl.
Rubbing alcohol, yes.
Yeah.
Yes, we saw that. I
And
guess
they
made
still
that
had the plastic bottles. Still,
We're still sitting on the line.
Yeah,
yes.
it was as if somebody just came in one day in the middle of the workday and went, "Oh, we're done,"
Mm-hmm.
shut it down, and everyone just walked off and they left everything in place, plastic bottles and all.
Everything,
Just set-
everything. I mean, it was-
neat. It's
yeah.
like a time capsule.
It
It's just
was.
like- it's like a frozen time.
So you're thinking in 1952 it shut down. Like I said, it was used to make bottled water and stuff after that. I had a little inside knowledge about it being sold just here recently. So I was able to get in contact with the new owners, Rick and Ryan.
Great guys, great
They-
guys.
they were.
And we will we'll do a shout out to them now, and
Yeah.
and however we do the tagging on this.
That's
Right.
great guys.
Yeah,
So I
great guys.
contacted them and I was like, we're bourbon historians. We'd love to come down and bring Lowell down, take pictures, which we hope to incorporate pictures like this in this. And I said, I'll bring a friend of mine, Nick Larquente, bourbon archaeologist. He's a big history geek too. If you know anything about the Bourbon Pompeii at Buffalo Trace, he worked on that. He worked on the Jack Jewett, discovered the Jack Jewett distillery from the late 1700s.
Now that's in Anderson County, right?
No, Woodford.
Woodford County.
Yeah, Woodford County, yes.
Yep.
So he worked on that, so he was a big history geek. So we all went down there, and we met Rick and Ryan and their plant manager, Michael. And they were gracious enough to give us a tour of the facility.
Yep.
We were there for 2-3 hours. And
I could have stayed
a lot longer.
a lot longer.
I mean,
Yeah,
it's
could've
their
stayed
ideals that they have and everything. Just seeing that place like it had shut down in 1950s.
Yeah,
I mean, that's what we
was
saw.
like it was like walking literally into. It always reminded me of H.G. Wells' The Time Machine,
Mm-hmm.
where you kind of are sitting in this machine, all of a sudden you wake up in a different reality. It was like that. It was like time had just stopped and you walked in. I was literally expecting to see someone like frozen in place, like like this, waiting to bottle something, and it's that surreal.
Yeah, the bottling lines are all still there. I mean, like I said, we saw the lines with the
Yeah.
rubbing alcohol bottles still sitting there, so everything was just still there. And they took us into one room where they had all the stuff that they collected, a lot of scientific.
Yeah, that's kind of neat.
It was very cool.
And I'll throw some photos of what he's talking about up there. It's kind of the, like he said, like a collection room. I'm not sure what the room is. It's just basically a big open room that they've kind of brought all the stuff that they've kind of scavenged around. One interesting thing that happened while we were there is I think Michael actually is the one that found it.
Oh, he found the bottle.
Yeah, he found the bottle. So they were out doing some work outside, and he goes, "Oh, guess what I just found?" And he goes, "I think I found an old original bottle
That still had bourbon in it.
Still had bourbon in
or
it.
some liquor in it.
Yeah, had some sort of spirits in it." He says, "I think I found a bottle. I was out there digging around in the dirt, and I think I found a bottle of original bourbon from this distillery." So.
You've got a picture of it. I mean, we were all looking at it and was like, wonder what that tastes like. So the three of them got together and they all took a little sip of it.
Yeah, and they were actually said, "Hey, it's not that bad."
Yeah, and we have no idea. We think it was made there. We hope it was made there.
Yeah, I hope it was made there.
There were no labels on it. Yeah.
No labels. It was just a little, I don't know, what, a pint, maybe a pint bottle, something like that.
Yeah.
But that was kind of one of the highlights of the day. But they did. We'll throw some photos of those up there. But again, that's kind of what pulls me to this, is because it's almost like time travel of where that you are doing stuff that a person from the 1700s would easily recognize the process and even the camaraderie and the product. And so, and you're sharing in that. So it's almost like reaching back through time. They're kind of reaching towards you. I don't know. That's kind of what I enjoy about the whole bourbon experience.
And every building we went into, even Nick, we were like, you walk from one to the next, your first expression was like, wow.
Yeah.
You know, when we went to the steam engine room, I mean, it looked like it was shut down in the 1950s and just, it may still work.
Yeah, right. Because I even asked, I was like, "You guys ever tried to fire this up?" And they're like, "No, not yet." Yeah, I was hoping the "not yet" meant we're going to, and you're invited back to crank, turn the crank.
Yeah, like I said, Lowell have a lot of pictures. Hopefully, quite a few pictures when we were down there. It was a great visit. The guys are great. When they get that open, I'm excited about it. Like I said, we're doing some restoration tours down there this summer. Whenever we can get started back. So it was great, and that's kind of, I guess, the end of our first episode.
I think so. I think it's a good place to stop. And so, what do we have coming up on the next one?
Next one, we'll talk more about the Samuels family, more about what you probably know who the Samuels family is. You may not have known about this part of it. We'll see what Bill will do with the money that he got from selling the TW things.
And so it's getting really interesting from here as far as again, Tiger King, Game of Thrones kind of thing. So it's going to get that was really interesting. So we'll start there. You will really enjoy the next bit of our series, and stay tuned. And there's going to be lots and lots more. There's probably more history than we will ever get into.
Yes, and I will finish my last bit of my $21 TW.
Yep. And on the next episode, we will actually tie in how Maker's Mark ties in with this whole gamut.
All right.
All right. Next time.